Welcome to Take the Lead Radio with Dr. Diane Hamilton, where she interviews some of the most successful leaders, entrepreneurs, authors, speakers, and other individuals who will inspire you to take the lead in your career and personal life. And now, here is Dr. Diane Hamilton.
I am here with Liz Wiseman, who is a researcher and executive advisor who teaches leadership to executives around the world. She's the author of the New York Times bestseller, Multipliers: How the Best Leaders Make Everyone Smarter, The Multiplier Effect, Tapping the Genius Inside Our Schools, and Wall Street Journal bestseller, Rookie Smarts: Why Learning Beats Knowing in the New Game of Work. She's the CEO of Wiseman Group, a leadership research and development firm headquartered in Silicon Valley. She's got the top clients, Apple, AT&T, Disney, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Nike. I mean, the list goes on and on. Salesforce, Tesla, and Twitter. Wow, I was just looking at this list. And she's been listed on the Thinkers 50 ranking and named one of the top 10 leadership thinkers in the world. I'm so excited to have you here, Liz. Welcome.
Oh, Diane, I'm excited to be here. Just listening to that made me very appreciative of those clients and a little bit tired.
I'll bet. Well, I knew of your work and I was very interested in everything you did. But, I recently watched one of your videos again, and I forget how you are just so interesting to me. And the way you deliver content is just so smooth, and you have this just very easy, you come across as just easygoing, but then you just have these amazing things that come out of your mouth. So I'm very interested in talking to you.
Well, now you've set expectations
the bar's really high.
Now I feel like I have to be both easygoing and smart.
Yes,
oh, man.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Well, I think it's kind of fun to start. Let's start with your background, because I know you were a former executive at Oracle, and you've worked in VP at Oracle University and all this background. So can you just give a little bit of background, what led you to this amazing point in your life?
Well, it's funny. I am finally doing the work that I wanted to do right out of college. So I came out of a graduate program in organizational behavior, and Diane, I wanted to teach leadership, teach management. Right. I don't know why. I don't know what got me on this, put this bee in my bonnet, but I really wanted to do this. And I contacted the premier management training company at the time. They happened to be in the Bay Area, where I was from. And I sent my resume and somehow finagled my way into a phone call with the president of the company and told him, he should hire me to teach management. And it was the best conversation, because he's like, wow, Liz, you just seem wonderful. You seem great. but if you want to teach management, you should probably go get some management experience. You'll be better at this. Trust me. And I'm like, I hate this message. I felt like in some ways called to do it. I have no idea why in hindsight. It seems ridiculous. But so I hated what he had to say, but I could sense that there was something smart about this. Mm-hmm. And so I took a job at this young, growing software company, Oracle, and all my friends, so this was right out of business school, and all my friends, they kind of averted their eyes when I told them I was going to go work for this company called Oracle, because they were all taking jobs working for IBM and McKinsey and Bain and real companies, Procter and Gamble, and these respectable companies. And I was going to go work for, they thought we were some specialty toothpaste manufacturer or something. And and I'm from the Bay Area, so I'm like, no, it's a software. This, a lot of things are happening in this space. And anyway, so it's this young, growing company, and there's two interesting things that happened for me. One was, they hired this really interesting profile of people. They were looking for people who had this kind of trifecta of talent. One, it was raw intelligence, achievement orientation, and then nice. So it's this really interesting, and I can assure you that they often compromised on the nice part of this. But so I end up in this sea of really smart, driven people, and I felt really lucky to be there, and that's that's what this observation I had about what happens to really, really smart people and what happens when they get put into management is actually kind of what it was, the germ that created this book, Multipliers, because I could see that not everyone that was really smart created intelligence or smarts around them. I'm like, wow, there's a lot of really smart people who suck the intelligence out of other people. Like, wow, why is it that he's allowed to be smart, but the people on his team aren't very smart? But yet they were when they got hired. Right. You know, they were smart and they were driven. But why do these really smart people end up cowering and holding back around some leaders and not others? So that was sort of the first interesting part of that experience. And then the second was, I'm like a year into my career and they're like, Liz, you're now the manager of the training department. Like, you're in charge of training for the company. You know, I don't know, we're about 5,000 or 6,000 people by this time, like, because we're growing so fast. And I mean, I was young, but I was just old enough, like maybe 24 or 25 at the time. I was just old enough to understand that there was something wrong about this. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm like a year out of college and now I'm in charge of training for the company, and you want me to build a university for the company? Like, this seems distinctly like a grown-up job. Like, this is the job people with gray hair have. And so I just got thrown into management way before I knew what I was doing or was even really ready for that kind of an experience. And it put me on this very, I'll use a euphemism for it, sort of an accelerated growth path. Right. Where it's mostly like just me underqualified and flailing and trying to figure out how to lead. And of course, it all gave me this incredible experience managing and leading, and a really interesting pool of people to be learning to do that and studying that in. And it was when I left Oracle that I decided that I would, I had some big questions about what made leaders effective and what made organizations intelligent and what dumbed down people and organizations. And so that's how I got from there to there.
Well, that is so fascinating, because right now I'm researching similar ideas of some of the things you mentioned for my book on curiosity, and I'm looking at the things that hold people back from being curious, which you're looking at things that keep what is not making you be as smart as you were or becoming as good a leader or whatever different things. It's interesting to see the things that hold people back, and I was really. When you first look at some people who get into leadership and you think, well, maybe it's just an example of the Peter principle, that they weren't supposed to be there. But it's interesting, your questions. In your talk, I watched The Power of Not Knowing that you gave at BYU. I really like that, by the way. I was just going to watch it for a few minutes. I was just glued to this. I'm like, this is really great.
It's a long talk. I have to admit, I admire anyone who gets through that whole talk, because it's not TED Talk 12 minutes.
It was great. It was great. And I didn't expect to get through the whole thing, but I was watching this going, wow, she really has, you address the things the way I like to look at things, and the way I find so fascinating is, well, you asked, can we actually get too smart, and the power, dangers of knowledge, and that there's a downside. And a lot of people would say, well, how can there be a downside to, isn't it great to be super bright? But you're not saying are you making a case for ignorance, or what are you doing with that? Let's just put it that way.
Well, I'm certainly not making a case for stupidity.
Right.
Or a willful lack of awareness or education. I'm making a case that there's good things that happen when people don't have all of the knowledge they need to solve a problem. When people are operating outside their area of expertise, when people are forced to go beyond what they know, that actually it's in not knowing that we come to truly understand something. Because when we've got it all figured out, like there is no curiosity. There is no reach out, to find out what other people know. When I was doing this research for the book Multipliers, and I was talking to a very dear mentor of mine, Dr. C.K. Prahalad, from the Ross School at the University of Michigan. It's an amazing management thinker. I was explaining my research to him and what I had found. And he said, Liz, this is a really, really important idea. And he's referring to this idea of like the leader as the multiplier to their team. And I showed him the data about why these leaders get so much more from other people. And he said, it's an important idea because the critical skill of this century is not what you know. It's your ability to like find out what other people know. And I really think, CK captured this for me. It's our ability to tap into what coming off the team of people we lead know. It's not how much we know that matters right now. It's how fast we can learn. Because what we know is becoming obsolete very, very quickly. And maybe I'm hypersensitive to this because I have 4 children, and 2 of them are through their teenage years. 2 of them are still in their teenage years. And when you have teenagers, like every day you're reminded how irrelevant you are, like how you are so yesterday, last decade, like Mom, the world doesn't work that way anymore. Mom, I can't believe you would get that data through that app. It's you're constantly reminded that, what, things are changing. And, if you are so fixated on what you think, what you know, what you're sure to be true, you're probably going to end up professionally irrelevant. Your teenagers will ignore you. I can assure you that. And you might just lead your team kind of competitively off a cliff. So sure you know where to go. But I think the reality is most leadership right now is about leading people into the unknown. Yeah. And, I think I grew up professionally in a world where like we thought about leadership as the leader's job is to take like her team to a better place. Like I have a vision and we're going to go here and this is what we're going to do. And like, this is the destination. Come with me. Like take my hand and I will lead you to this place. And I think more and more our jobs as managers and leaders is to say, you know what, we can't continue to do what we're doing. We can't stay where we are. We've got to move and we've got to go this direction, but I don't really know where that is. I just know we need to go. Like it's about taking people into the unknown and building a team that's smart enough to recognize, okay, we're here and now we need to go there. I think it's a very, very different kind of leadership.
Well, that's interesting. Well, you brought up so many things that are very fascinating to me. I had Naveen Jain on my show, who has reinvented his career so many times. He's the billionaire behind Viome and Moon Express and all these different companies. And he had told me, for him, he wants to go in an industry he knows nothing about, wants to start from scratch. And, fresh eyes, you don't have to worry about all the things you don't know. You learn it from scratch, and then you don't have these things that you maybe didn't learned properly, or you're doing it all from scratch. And I thought it was very fascinating that he just picks completely different industries, from medicine to going to the moon. You know what I mean? There's no thing that's off limits to him. And I think that it's really important because to look at what we know and what we think we should know, and all the factors that you bring up as far as just intelligence of how we in the past have felt kind of insecure if we didn't know it all, and now we can surround ourselves by smart people. But I think what I liked about what you're talking about is not only is it important to surround yourself by other smart people that who maybe know things you don't know, but you can amplify that intelligence instead of sucking the life out of it, and how do we do that though? You're saying some leaders do it really well and then others don't. What's the difference between those two leaders?
Diane, I think you're going to like this little data point I found in my research.
Okay.
So when I studied these leaders that I came to call diminishers, these leaders who got the best out of people, like leaders around whom we're smart, we're capable, we make progress, et cetera. And, then I compared that against leaders I came to call diminishers.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at both types of leaders or both scenarios, and I compared them, I think, on 67 different characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet you can guess what the number one characteristic is of these multiplier leaders. Now, maybe I think I wrote this somewhere in the book, but it's like buried on page like 48, paragraph 3, or it's like a tiny little reference in the book.
Uh-oh, it should be big if it starts with a C.
Well, it is. It's intellectual curiosity. It's the trait most correlated with multiplier leaders.
Yeah.
And it's not so much what they do as a leader, it's how they think. And it's this combination of this belief they have that the people around them are smart and can figure it out, which means they ask them, they give them big challenges, they give them ownership, they keep ownership with them, because, if people are fundamentally smart and they're going to figure it out. It was kind of like back to my early Oracle days, that profile they hired for, like raw smarts and achievement orientation. When you hire people for that, it's a little easier to remember, oh yeah, I hired smart people and they're probably going to figure it out because they have this sort of drive.
Mm-hmm. But
it's amazing.
You get people though that hire those people and then they're idea killers, right? They don't.
Right. They forget that they're actually surrounded by smart people. And we're all surrounded by smart people. Yeah, like is everyone in our company, everyone on the planet, a total genius? Absolutely not. Of course not. But everyone has genius. Everyone brings intelligence. When they badge in the morning, everyone comes in with some form of intelligence, and with the right leadership, that intelligence can be used and it can be grown. So these multipliers are operating from this belief that, there's intelligence around me. And they get beyond their own intelligence and they're able to be curious and interested in what other people know or how the world works. And, in some ways, I think one of the dangers of the way people might interpret my research and my books is like, oh man, you don't want to work for a genius. Like they're jerks. Like smart people, problem. Not at all. Like I love working around really, really smart people. I want to work for someone who's a genius. But this is kind of how I want people to treat their own intelligence. I want people to own it and be like, you know what? I'm brilliant. I'm a genius and I'm over it. Because too many
Your
people come into, I'm a genius and I'm over it. Because see, the person who understands and is confident in their own intelligence, these are great people to work with. Because when they come into work, they're not trying to prove oh, I deserve to be here. I deserve to be at the head of the table. I deserve to be the boss. I'm supposed to do all the talking and tell people what to do. The meeting isn't going to get contorted and manipulated into a scenario where they look like the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
They're competent and now they can focus on the intelligence of others. I mean, if you think about some of the most intelligent people who have gotten over it, they're incredible to be around and to work with. You want to be at a dinner party with them. You want to be in a meeting with them.
Right. And I just was at a dinner and meeting with a bunch of those type of people because I'm on the board of advisors with DocuSign, and Keith Kroc is quite an interesting guy, the chairman of,
I know Keith.
Isn't he, he's over it and he's so smart and he just is so humble, you know what I mean?
Can we talk about Keith for a little bit?
Yes.
Keith is, he's one of these amazing leaders. And so if the people listening aren't familiar with Keith, he started Ariba and, DocuSign. He's taken a number. He's a massive, disruptor in the tech space and has built these incredible companies. What's great about Keith, if you really watch him, is that people will do almost anything for him. Like
Yep.
he has a way of leading that he makes it about you and about what you can do. Like, I feel brilliant around Keith.
Right. I do too.
And you want to work hard for him, and that's, you know, his people. And it's interesting, people, I was just in a meeting with him, I think it was last week, and, you know, I saw a former 4-star general and, you know, a director of NASA, like these people saying,
Oh,
like,
you were at
oh,
my
yeah.
same meeting, I guess, and I didn't get to talk to you. That's
Yeah.
funny.
I thought that maybe you might be. Like, these are people who said, like, hey, whatever you want, like, I'm happy to do this for you. And I think it illustrates one of these principles in multipliers, is that these multipliers get so much out of people. Like, what I found in the research is these diminishing leaders get less than half of people's intelligence.
Yeah, that was an interesting figure. Wow.
It's horrifying. I mean, and of course the company is paying full price, top dollar. You know, they're paying sort of $1 for a resource, but getting 48 cents of value on that dollar.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it.
You know, these multiplier leaders get, what came out of the research was, it was between 95 and 98, depending on how you measure it, 98% of people's available intelligence. And
how do you measure that, though?
We simply ask people. We say, you know, how much of your intelligence was this leader getting based on the way he or she led? Because only you, Diane, would know how much of your capability is being used.
Right.
Because we all have this latent intelligence, these reservoirs of capability that often leaders don't see. But so these multiplier leaders get so much from people, and you can look at it as, oh wow, like this is a way of extracting capability, better utilizing your resources. But man, this isn't just a good deal for management. It's a killer good deal for the people who work for these leaders, because you know, it's funny, I study leadership, and I study leadership all around the world, but I tell you, I don't feel like much of an expert on leadership. You know, at best, I'm a student of leadership. I'll tell you what I've developed a lot of expertise on is followership. Because I have come over the last decade to really understand how much people want to contribute their capability. And this is, it crosses industries and cultures, you know, continents, is people come to work every day desperately wanting to give 100% of what they have. And, you know, and not that people want to be asked to do more work and to be, you know, like laden with more and more burden, to be sort of used up. People want to be given harder work, and people want to be more deeply used. And it's what I saw, and you and I both saw it around with Keith Kroc, is that people are like, hey, like I come to this advisory board with like a network and knowledge and capabilities, and I would love to share it with you.
Right.
People, I mean, like, who doesn't like to be asked, what do you think?
Yeah, and I loved when they asked who's here, because Keith asked, just because Keith's so nice and you want to be there for Keith. And I mean, everybody's raising their hands, you know, because he's somebody you want to help and to be around, just what you said. And it reminds me, when you talk about Keith as such a great example, you also gave a not so great example in your talk about the guy that wrote T's all over everything. And I want you to share that story, because I've worked with people like that who just belittle people. They think it puts them a little higher up, you know, and they just don't see how much damage they do when they're micromanaging or idea killing, or all the things that go along with that kind of behavior. Do you want to share that story?
Oh, I had forgotten about this story. I'm so glad you reminded me about it. So this was an executive at Oracle who actually ran 2 different divisions at once, kind of had 2 executive jobs, and he's got a huge job. You know, he's running a major product division, and he reviews all of the user manuals being produced, all that documentation. I don't like people. when I use software, I don't read those manuals.
Right.
But he's reading every word that is written that comes out of his division. And, he's going through documents, and he had this code, and some of the people who worked for him told me about this code. Like, you'd get papers back from him, and they would have these T's written all over them. And, the first time people are reading, I'm like, what's T? That's T. Like, is that some like new editorial code? And they would get to the end, and there would be like a helpful legend there, and it just said T equals terrible.
Great.
And it was just symbolic of how he led. He micromanaged, and his orientation was that of pointing out what was wrong, rather than what was right.
That's
I actually had a really funny meeting with him, and I got put in charge of, like, this was back when I got put in charge of the university, and I think because I was young and probably got a little bit of a rebel spirit anyway, I started making a lot of changes to how we did things. And this was an operation that he had personally set up. And I started making a lot of changes, and people were like, oh, he's not going to like that. And I'm like, I'm not worried about it. Oh, he's not going to like that either. Oh, I'm not too worried about it. No, Liz, he's definitely not going to like this. I'm like, you know what? Hey, if you give me a big job, you got to give me some space to do the job. And so I'm doing all this stuff. He sees me in a parking lot one day, and he's like, Liz, would you get on my luncheon calendar? I'd like to have lunch with you. And I'm like, I went home to my husband. I'm like, hey, I'm going to get fired at the deli. I'm going to get fired over food. And we have this lunch, and it's this awkward, uncomfortable lunch because I have no idea like where this is all going. And I really think I'm going to get fired as soon as we get done eating. And we get to the end of it, and he said, Liz, I just wanted to let you know that I have no problem with what you're doing.
Oh, that's such a positive way of putting it. I have no problem.
and I'm like, oh, and that was kind of it. And he didn't say good job.
Girl, huh?
That was his atta girl. And I told some people who had worked for him for a fair bit of time this story, and they're like, Liz, that was the nicest thing he's ever said to anyone. Like, you got penultimate compliment.
Wow.
I'm like, because he basically said, you're not a total screw up. Like,
it's like, you're not as dumb as you look, kind of.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's that level of,
yeah, like, you're not doing it my way, but it's okay. And
backhanded. Wow.
This was how he led, which was micromanaging in detail. And here, you kind of got me going on this story, and I want to round this out.
Okay.
So he managed for a number of years like that. And I saw him many years later, and it was like an Oracle reunion. And it was it was this group of people who they kind of know, like I think they called it the Oracle 100, like the 100 people who kind of started and grew Oracle. Like, I don't know, we somehow appointed ourselves important and got together for drinks or something. And when I saw him at this session, I said, oh, this must be really fun for you to like see what you helped to grow and to, and to build. And he goes, actually, no, it was kind of painful. And this is what he said. He said, I realized that I was probably really hard on people. And get this, I was really hard on people, and I probably didn't need to be.
That's interesting. I wonder how he came to know that.
Yeah, it is interesting because I think it's back to this, if you hired people who were bright and driven or put together, like, you probably don't need to beat them up and tell them what they're doing wrong all the time. That maybe, you need to give them direction and clear feedback, and you need to tell them when they're screwing up. But it was just interesting for him to get sort of to the end of his career and see that actually that way of leading didn't really produce the best results. And it certainly didn't give him the legacy
right.
that maybe he would have liked to have had. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because, well, first of all, you must go to some interesting cocktail parties if you're always on Billionaire Row over there with Keith Kroc and Greg. I mean, and Ellison. I mean, it's just the group that you have had a chance to know has got to be fascinating. And I think that you get these people, but then it's so late in the game that they see what they've been doing. I mean, Steve Jobs was fine with them writing the biography on him, which I found interesting. What did you think of his leadership style, and why do you think he was okay with everybody knowing how he treated people?
Oh, yes. Steve Jobs is, by the way, I should say that the person I was referring to before was not Larry Ellison.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't mean that. Yeah.
and really, well, I'm clarifying that I should confess, Larry doesn't invite me to his cocktail parties, but I did really, really like working for Larry Ellison, who was really, really tough. Larry Ellison was like a little bit of, in some ways, a softer version of Steve Jobs. And, Steve Jobs is so interesting. I get this question a lot, like, whoa, like Liz, like your whole notion of multipliers and diminishers. And I should add to that mix also the accidental diminisher, because that's, Diane, where actually things really get interesting, because most of the diminishing that's happening in our world, in our corporations, in our church organizations, in our homes, most of that is coming from the well-intended leader, the accidental diminisher. That's an interesting conversation. But people say, I get it, but what about Steve Jobs? Because he was such a diminisher. And Steve is a really interesting one, because to understand how he led, you really have to understand sort of Steve version 1 and then Steve version 2, like how he led before he got the boot from Apple was very different than how he led when he came back. Now, in both versions, he's sharp, and he's a sharp critic. But I've done a lot of work at Apple. I've coached a lot of executives at Apple, and it's been very interesting to hear somebody say, you know what, Steve Jobs was an absolute multiplier to me. Like I did my best work around Steve. Like I would have worked for him anywhere, anytime. Like, he was kind of an SOB. Like, he was sharp, hard-edged and sharp-tongued. But, and like, when you look at what these multiplier leaders do, well, first we have to start with diminishers. They tend to be sort of talent hoarders, empire builders. They tend to be tyrants and know-it-alls and decision makers and micromanagers. And yes, Steve Jobs did some of those things. He had, for sure, some diminishing qualities. But when you look at what these multiplier leaders do, they're talent magnets. They don't just acquire resources. They use people's genius. And people flock to work for them. They're liberators. They create an environment where it's safe to make mistakes, or to try things, or to dare and do something brilliant. They're challengers. They don't tell people what to do. They issue bold challenges. Kind of like when Steve, sat across the table from the CEO of Corning, this famous story about that iPhone was not coming together without this specialized glass surface. And he kind of like just stared that CEO down and kind of dared him, like, could you make this glass? Like, what would it take for you to be able to make this glass for us? And people said, like, Steve had this way of challenging you and inviting you to do hard things. And like, he was this talent magnet. People flocked to him. So he definitely had his diminishing streaks. Yeah. But he gave people ownership. He held people accountable. He just told them like your work is shit, like was kind of his famous line. But it wasn't like he did the work for them. Yeah, right. He pulled great work out of them. And, and I think it also brings up this other thing I found in my research is, while there's some very consistent things that multipliers do, they all kind of go about it in their own way. Like we bring our own style and our own personality to that. Steve was just on the extreme edge, and some with a few diminishing qualities, which you see in founder-led tech companies. Right. They're replete with them. Well, and so they have a whole set of coping strategies for dealing with that.
Yeah, he definitely had a unique style, and he comes up in a lot. I still teach a lot of business courses, and we talk about a lot of these things. And actually, I teach some courses where we talk about being a good follower, and a lot of the things you're talking about here. And I think what you brought up about your year's question about how does what you know get in the way of what you don't know, and some of the things you talked about, I want to touch on because it helps me with my view of curiosity, because a lot of what I saw as the four things really hold people back from being curious is, a lot of it's fear, a lot of it is your just your assumptions that you make, that and then some of it's technology doing it for you or not figuring it out, and then some of it's environment. And a lot of things we're talking about here is environment. And your boss, your peers, your parents, your teachers, the people, your relationships, that it's very challenging when you're around people who like suck the life out of you and make you not interested in things because it's not cool to like this, or why would you even think of liking that? And I'm curious of how do we know, what gets in our way of what we don't know?
Oh. I don't know how to see it. I only know how to keep asking the question. And for me, this question came after 17 years at Oracle. I'm finally leaving, and I left Oracle. Everyone was like, "Why are you leaving Oracle? You got a great gig." In fact, my husband was just like, "Like they love you there, they pay you well, you've got this great job," and I said, "No, I'm leaving because I know how to do what I do." And it was a terrible feeling. Like I had been underqualified, and it was really fun. In fact, like I used to get teased about being a little bit underqualified for a big job. Like one time I had a VP who he introduced me to it was a cocktail party. Everyone's going to think I spend all my time at cocktail parties. I really don't. But I don't even drink. But yet I'm at this cocktail party. And I guess this is what happens if you don't drink and you go to cocktail parties. You probably have interesting conversations.
Yeah. And you remember.
So, exactly. So my VP is Oracle introducing me. I'm a year into this job, like trying to build this university, maybe 2 years in. And he introduces me to an Oracle customer, like a man with gray hair, like who looked like kind of a mature executive. And he said, "This is Liz. She runs Oracle University." And the man does a total flinch. Like he's not holding back. He's just like his whole body flinched. Because he's seeing like this kid who's got this big job, and Bob, my boss, was just decided he was going to have some fun with this, and this otherwise very nice, supportive man, he just said, "Oh yeah, Liz isn't particularly well qualified for her job." And I'm like, "Thanks for the executive air cover." Yeah, I was expecting him to say something just a little bit more supportive. I think he might have said, "But you know what? She's really smart. She's doing a great job." Maybe he said that. That's probably not what I heard. And so I'm looking for a comeback. And so my comeback is just what I felt to be true. I'm like, "Hey, Bob, who wants a job they're qualified for?"
Yeah. So you knew early on.
Yeah, there'd be nothing to learn. And so I'm coming off of this run of having all of these oversized jobs. Every one of them is a stretch and a reach, and I'm learning. And I'm finally now like legit. People are like, come to me for, "Hey, we're trying to set up a university. What should we do?" You become a go-to person. And I have to admit, it feels kind of good.
Yeah.
For a day or two, maybe for a year or two, if you're not onto this trap.
Right.
But then it starts to feel shallow, and that's where I left actually to go do something I didn't know how to do, which actually led me to become a management researcher. So, I'm a management researcher because I didn't know how to do it, which is a funny.
Yeah.
But it's funny. People tell me that, "Wow, Liz, your research is probably more rigorous than most academic level research." And I do it because I was a rookie. I'm like, well, I figured so I kind of doubled down. But it was in this state of worrying, like, I wonder, now that I'm legit, now that I know stuff, now that I'm like deemed as good at something, like how is that going to blind me from seeing what I need to see? Because I'm now going out into an area where I fundamentally don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. I mean, not completely. It's not like I decided I was going to go and be a dentist or something like this, and drill on through people's skulls. Right. I'm not in any way suggesting that, but I wondered, like, am I going to be so convinced I've got things figured out that I'm not able to learn, or what will I miss because I'm convinced? And I actually think, Diane, I think this is not just a workplace issue. I think this is the issue of our time. Is, we are a collection of people who are so convinced we understand the problem and have a solution. Take immigration. What's happening right now in the U.S. with immigration. There's so many people who are just convinced that they know what the solution to that looks like, that they're not only not hearing other people's version of a solution, but they're not even really understanding the problem. And so I think it's a useful question to just ask ourselves, right? How does what we know, or what we're already convinced of, going to blind us to what we don't know but need to learn? I just think it's a question we probably ought to ask about once a month or once a week.
Well, that's something that goes right along with what I'm saying on assumptions for curiosity. We assume we know the answer, so we just close our mind. We're convinced, you know what I mean? And so why research anything? Why be curious about it? Because we know the answer, or we think we know the answer, or we think whatever we think. And when you're talking about all this stuff, it reminds me, I spent 20 years in pharmaceuticals. So you're at the end, you're like, oh, I know everything, right? And then you leave, and I went into banking. I know absolutely nothing. That's a weird feeling when you first go from one thing to something completely different. You go from being the person everybody goes to having not a clue in the world. But it was an exhilarating feeling. And you're saying we're at our best when we know the very least. But, because we want to find out, we become curious, right? That's great for curiosity, and you want to learn and get to this next level. But should we always be reinventing ourselves? And how long when do you know when it's time to move on?
Yeah. I mean, these experiences stoke our curiosity. And I think there's two ways to retain, I call it rookie smarts, but it's this hungry, hopeful way of working where we are reaching out to other people. We're mobilizing the expertise of others rather than relying on our own expertise. We are operating in sort of lean, agile sprints rather than marathons, because if you don't know what you're doing, you can't put together a year-long plan. You've got to hey, am I doing it right? It's like, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Have I got it? Am I doing it right? Am I on base? Am I off base? Too hot, too cold? We're seeking feedback. And what I found when I looked at how people operate when they're new to something important and hard, that we operate in very, very predictable ways. So I think there's two, and they're not only predictable, they're very productive and powerful ways. There's actually two ways to work in this mindset and these practices that I call rookie smarts. One is to continue to think and operate like a rookie. And it's to continue to do things we've been doing, but to maintain the mindset. It's sort of like to be young of mind, but to continue to do work we've always done. And the book is full of all sorts of exercises to do this, like periodically make an I don't know list, spend time with newcomers and amateurs, and there's a variety of things that you can do. Periodically toss out your notes, meaning toss out your standard templates and tools and the things you come to rely on. That, I think, is the hard way to do it. But it can work. I think I'm fundamentally lazy, and which is why I always like the approach that I think is easier. And the easier approach is just put yourself in situations where you are in over your head, where you are doing something for the first time, because it forces you to be curious. So left on my own, choosing curiosity or forced curiosity. Like I tend to go to forced curiosity.
But you're choosing to go to forced.
Yeah, it is. But like, that's so here's my personal practice, is I am big on the naive yes. And the naive yes is not saying yes to everything. So it's not like yes to anything someone wants you to do. It's saying yes to things that look different and hard. Mm-hmm. It's saying yes before your brain has had a lot of time to find reasons to say no.
Yeah, I love that. It's the just do it mentality, in a way, right?
Yeah, and I think I wish I had it memorized, but there's a great kind of line from Richard Branson on this, and I'm sure someone listening probably could quote this better than I could, but it's like, when someone gives you an opportunity to do something you've never done before, just say yes, mm-hmm. and then figure it out while you're doing it. And there's so many people like Richard Branson who have made whole careers of this, but I would encourage people to, when something comes on, to not go into deep analysis mode and to come up with the 10 reasons why you can't and you shouldn't. Yeah. I'm really good at the naive yes. I just like when people say, hey, will you do this? I'm like,
yes. How hard can it be? I'll figure it out.
How hard can it be? Like one of my favorites was actually when I was releasing the book Rookie Smarts, and there's opportunities for writing articles and bylines, and I get an email from someone. It's at Time Magazine. They said, hey, we saw your new book, and Apple is going to be releasing their wearable device, what we now call the Apple Watch. Mm-hmm. They said, Apple's going to be releasing a new wearable device tomorrow. We're wondering if you could write an article about whether these other smaller niche wearable players have a chance of competing against Apple. Like, basically, can you write an analysis piece on the wearables market? Uh-huh. And they said, and Apple's announcing tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific, and we want to post the article at 11:30 Pacific time.
Uh-huh. So they give you a lot of time. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so you're basically going to have to kind of do a first draft overnight, listen to the announcement live, uh-huh. rewrite your goal during the announcement, and then submit within 30 minutes. And my husband looks at this request. He said, Liz, you're going to say no to this, aren't you? It's ridiculous. You don't know anything about the wearables market. Uh-huh. And I'm like, yeah, but you know what? I have overnight to figure this out. And I know a lot of people who do know a lot about the wearables market. And I know enough about Apple and enough about tech and enough about, incumbents versus newcomers in markets. I'm like, mm-hmm. yeah, I'm going to say yes to that. It was so fun for me to do this.
I would like that too. It's challenging though.
Yeah, it's challenging, but it was just, and this was an example of a naive yes. And I'm not saying, everyone should sign up for something just exactly like that, but.
Well, what's the worst that could happen is what you have to tell yourself. You know what I mean? People are so afraid of failure and so afraid it's not going to be perfect that they don't do anything. They become paralyzed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And the worst that could happen is that they don't publish the article. Yeah. Because if it's terrible, they're not actually going to publish it. And, sometimes we envision far greater consequences than there really are. And it's not like we shouldn't put a safety net under us when we're doing something really hard. And, it's funny, I went back to the guy who told me, the cocktail party, this is underqualified for this big job. He was actually the person who kind of put me in this job in the first place. And I said, hey, Bob, now you kind of gave me a really big job at a young age. Was it that you saw some genius or capability in me, or were you guys just a little bit desperate? and I figured I knew the answer to this. And he wrote back, he said, Liz, truth be told, it was a little of both. For sure, it was a little of both. And I'm Bob, don't you ever think it was a little bit irresponsible what Oracle did, or any fast growing company does, where you put people in jobs really way before they're ready? And he goes, Liz, no, because we never put you on a tightrope without a net under you. Of course, we weren't going to let you fail. Like there were things that were holding you up that maybe you just didn't see at the time.
Well, and for me, there's something about somebody like you, the just do it kind of personality, that your 10% is better than anybody else's 100%. Just because you're going to try so hard, you know what I mean? And even if you don't have 100% of the knowledge, just because of what you're capable of, I think that they saw that, you know what I mean? And I think that's what we look for in people, you know, the people that have that naive yes, that are willing to be innovative, that are willing to just try, you know what I mean? There's so few people who are willing to try like that.
Well, and I think it's a willingness to try. And well, I appreciate the 10% versus 100%. Like I was no smarter or no, more driven than really anyone else. I think if there was something I brought to it, it was just a willingness to try and a willingness to recover. Like I've made a lot of mistakes. And I think this is one of the critical skills of our time right now, because our cycles are spinning so fast and because most of us are operating in spaces where we don't have best practices and deep experience to rely on. Like what you've got to get is you've got to get a rapid recovery mechanism going for yourself. Like you have to know how to, everyone's talking about failure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not hard to fail. Like I've done that before. That's like the trick is failure recovery. Right. And I think, Diane, to your point and to the work, like what holds people back is if you don't know how to get yourself back up on the horse, if you don't know how to recover from failure, you're going to hold back. You're going to be like, no naive yes for me. No, thank you. I'm going to do what I've always done. Mm-hmm. But there's an art to recovery, and it's like, admit it fast. Everyone already knows. You might as well just own it. Admit it, fix it, tell people you fixed it, and then put another 5% improvement on it. But if you can get that cycle going, I think not only do you do great work, but work is joyful.
Yeah. Well, that's a great place for us to end, because I agree with all that. And I hope everybody takes some time to watch your talk that you gave at BYU. It's called The Power of Not Knowing. And I'm sure you're going to get as tense as I did watching her stretch that rubber band. And I kept waiting to see if somebody was going to have it break or snap on somebody. But they have to watch. It's only a teaser. We can't tell them what it's about. You
got to watch. But I will say that the person who I'm doing that rubber band stretch with was the dean of the business school who I TA'd for when I was a student. Uh-huh. So this was some retaliation, just a little bit of retaliation.
There you go. Well, if anybody wants to find out more about your books and what you're doing, and is there a website or multiple websites? Is there something you can share?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple book websites, multipliersbooks.com, because there's actually 3 different multipliers books, 2 additional multipliers, and then a book called The Multiplier Effect for educational leaders. There's rookiesmarts.com. Our company, a firm, our research and teaching firm is the Wiseman Group.com. I'm at Liz Wiseman on Twitter. Pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. And that talk that you mentioned, like, I think there's a bunch of talks out there, but it's funny, somehow people like that talk. It's, I think you could find it on YouTube, mm-hmm. Liz Wiseman, The Power of Not Knowing BYU. I also gave a similar talk at Stanford, but I think the one you're referring to, you can find at BYU Speeches as well.
Well, that is awesome. Thank you so much. This was so fun having you on the show. Thank you, Liz.
Very, very fun to talk to you. And I feel like this week, and maybe hopefully beyond that, I'm going to be just a little bit more curious.
Well, good.
Because I've talked with you.
Yes, same here.